Tim Winton wrote, "When you're bred for mastery, when you're trained to endure and fight and suppress empathy, how do you find your way in a world that cannot be mastered?" Writing a fire plan means confronting exactly this question. If you're a man, it also means working out what kind of man you want to appear to others to be. Before 2009, the Victorian policy was to prepare, stay and defend or leave early, known as stay or go. It urged residents to be prepared to respond to an emergency without assistance. After Black Saturday, the Victorian Bushfire Royal Commission found that this policy did not account for ferocious fires. The advice is now to leave and live. Men are unequivocally stated as being considerably more likely to die in a bushfire, yet women and girls die in Australian bushfires at a rate of 40%. This high rate is surprising given that firefighters are mostly men. In fact, women have been actively excluded from firefighting. In Victoria in 2016, women were only 22% of DELP firefighters and 3 to 4% of MFB and CFA firefighters. On March 6, Nick McKenzie, who you saw earlier, reported everyday sexism and a hyper-masculine culture in the MFB from a Verioc report which is unreleased due to legal action from the United Firefighters Union. Other significant reviews have also shown serious cultural and diversity issues, according to a government spokesperson quoted in that article. Our own report into barriers for women is further evidence that women are not welcomed as firefighters. So what's happening that makes women this vulnerable to dying in bushfires? Why is this not a major line of inquiry? Only 5% of people have a written fire plan. Agreement on a plan is almost impossible when there are competing priorities. Men, as protector and provider, prioritise defending the home, and women, in their role as nurturer, prioritise the safety of children and partners. In 2010, John Hanmer investigated fatalities on Black Saturday for the Royal Commission and wrote that there is evidence of disagreement as the fire approached. In virtually all cases, it was between women who wanted to leave and take the men with them and men who either wanted to stay and defend or who felt they had to stay and support others. Christine Erickson, sitting here, and co-researchers did the first gendered analysis of the Bushfire CRC's Black Saturday dataset, providing a wealth of gendered data in 2015. They found that more women than men left within an hour of the fires arriving, with over half believing they left late and that it was dangerous. They too found the conflict most often stemmed from men's reluctance to leave. This presentation is drawn from our research with 47 workers, 30 women and 32 men. Of the 30 women, 27 fought or escaped the fires. 24 of these thought that they would die, 13 were alone, and 7 had dependent children. Women's descriptions of what they do in bushfires are rare. In highlighting their courage, this presentation takes nothing from the extraordinary role that men often took. Women and men acted with courage, persistence and selflessness, and in equal measure they spoke of their own uncertainty, regret and terror. They reacted to life and death situations as individuals rather than along gendered lines. However, gendered expectations shaped their risk, ability and legacy. First, a note about gender, reiteration from this morning. While gender clearly includes people of diverse gender and sexual identity, this presentation focuses on heterosexual couples and fire planning. It recognises the constraints on women's autonomy evident in our patriarchal society and the structural discrimination of men against women. Through lack of autonomy, women may be prevented from making their own decisions. Women rate their ability to defend property and lives in a bushfire as lower than men and are often unable to influence men. Kristen recalled her preparations on Black Saturday and her husband saying, "You're being stupid." And I said, "Okay, could you just get the pump out?" I had everything ready and he was, "Oh, you're being this, you're being that." Nina said, "I called him all day and asked him to come home and he's like, 'Don't be silly.' He made it home, I think, 10 minutes before they closed the roads." Mia, 7 months pregnant with a 2-year-old, said, "We tried to convince my husband that maybe he should leave too. He didn't. I talked to my neighbour, told her to leave with her young kids, tried to convince her husband when he returned that it was actually serious and not a joke, and then I left." Like others reflecting on the deaths, Lou said, "Most of the blokes would have said, 'This is my house, I built it, I'm not leaving this joint.' And the wife would say, 'Are you sure we're going to be all right?' 'Yeah, we'll be all right.' And I knew a few families that perished like that." Women's evacuation appears limited by concessions to partners, some of them controlling, and also by deliberate actions by violent men. Evacuation is challenging for women who have no freedom to act and are trapped in unsafe home environments. In a country where one woman a week is murdered by her intimate partner, attention has not been given to the role domestic violence plays in preventing women from enacting a fire plan. We know of one woman whose husband left her to die on the night of the fires by taking their one car and leaving. Society carefully monitors gender roles, especially in disaster. Historically, writing women out of disasters except as victims has been blatant. Samuel Henry Prince, known as the first scholar in this field, rewrote a history of a 1917 disaster, omitting all the positive references to women and the negative references to men. Society defends a gender schema that enshrines needy women and strong men, editing out women's competence. In Australia, masculinity is linked with staying and cowardice, femininity and fear with leaving. Researchers Tyler and Fairbrother write, "It's practically impossible to ignore the heavily gendered nature of bushfire response in this country." Black Saturday has barely dented notions of staying as courageous, leaving as easy, men as heroic, women protected. Swedish researchers analysed 18 disasters over 3 centuries and concluded women and children first is a myth, including on the Titanic. Neither do notions of being protected stand up in escaping bushfires, with women and children often driving out alone. The Royal Commission reported that on Ash Wednesday in 1983, most people died during late evacuations, and the majority of those were women and children, whereas most of the men had been killed defending property. Although this was not the case on Black Saturday, versions of this depiction of men and women in bushfires continue to be stated. For example, in 2017, this quote here from a book is of females fleeing too late and men protecting. On Black Saturday, women, like men, were on the roads, getting kids to safety, moving trucks, getting petrol and checking on others. Elise said, "There were big plumes of smoke that just filled up the entire sky. My friend Cheryl had turned up the drive to our place, so I think that's a real act of bravery. She came up to warn us, then did a U-turn and took off." Tamara said, "The flames were leaping above the trees, so I said to the girls, 'We're out of here.' It was like driving by memory. On the way, there were some people not knowing where to go, so I told them to come with me, and there were another 2 young guys too." Jessie said, "You could see the flames. We had 2 interstate trucks, which were our livelihood, and both were home. My husband rang me and said, 'Get the trucks out because the wind's changed and it's blowing towards us.' And she did." The term evacuate sounds benign, but the women described thick smoke and seeing enormous fireballs catching up behind. Power lines and trees were down or on fire, with embers falling all around, often on roads that were mountainous and dangerous at any time. Ruby said, "It was terrible. There were horses stuck on fences, animals over the road. We recognised cars from friends who'd crashed and didn't know whether they were alive or dead. I couldn't even get out on the road. There were so many cars. We looked over and the fire was there. I had 4 lives that I was responsible for and my own. I shook uncontrollably. I drove with the masses, 140 k's per hour. It was windy and dark. We couldn't breathe the air. It was just too thick with smoke. Everyone was running for their life. Such courageous efforts were mostly unrewarded. In staying, even those with well-established fire plans were challenged. Nina said, "We had our tank of air, generators, hoses inside. The plan was to be inside when the fire went over. To see the enormity of the smoke, it was like an atom bomb, the way it grew. I've got a tiny house, and that first instinct when we've run in and I've turned around and just looked at the house and thought, what are we thinking? We're going to die." 69% of those who died were said to have been passively sheltering. The term itself was called into question by the Royal Commission. In our research, women and men told of hours spent urgently safeguarding homes while hearing other houses exploding, people screaming, birds dropping from the sky. It was sheer hard work in increasingly desperate circumstances. Ellen said, "It was blowing a gale. We could see comets of fire. You had to wet everything as soon as it came in. It became really difficult to breathe. The kids were sheltering under wet towels and we'd take it in turns. One would go upstairs to put out the embers and the other would go with the kids for a bit. My son was screaming, 'Mummy, I need you,' and 'Mummy, are we going to be dead?' Gina said, 'My grandson was on the couch, huddled up in the fetal position, stinking hot, but he's in a blanket, saying, "Nana, the house is going to burn down." I said, "It will not burn down." I kept running inside every 5 or 10 minutes to the kids, and so did my daughter. We'd take it in turns so they weren't panicking. When I thought we were going to die was when finally Caitlin got through to 000. She said, "We just need to let you know to look for 6 people." What strikes me is that the women's narratives of fighting the fire or escaping them is rare in the history of Australian bushfires. Seldom were there awards for women or hero status. Instead, what is rewarded is enactment of hegemonic masculinity. A meta-analysis of 150 studies writes of men's risk-taking as a socially instilled and highly valued masculine tendency. One participant referred to the fire as a boy's own adventure. Others spoke of hypermasculine behaviour and men putting themselves in the way of danger. Researchers question firefighters' interest in preventing fire, as this is the very thing that allows them to demonstrate their masculinity. Gender roles are central to fire planning and risk. We burden women with responsibilities that hamper escape, like children and pets, encourage emotional dependence on a man, skills of domesticity, block their access to roles in firefighting, give less access to resources like money and cars, encourage giving in to men's authority, and affirm their sacrifice of their own safety and livelihoods for the good of the family. Men are better resourced to survive with greater access to training, equipment, cars, money. Growing up, boys are more likely to learn about engines, chainsaws, generators and mechanical equipment, skills that enhance bushfire survival. Although they're frequently rewarded with medals and sobriquets of hero, expectations of heroic masculinity set them up for failure. A participant said, "Men felt an immense responsibility to protect. They're the men of the house. To protect their family, that's a massive responsibility. The role they took on that day, not willingly." Christine Erickson writes that societal pressure sees men attempt to perform protective roles when the fire threatens, that many have neither the knowledge nor the ability to fulfil safely. The expectations of men are clear. Sophie said, "We never had a fire plan. You thought he'd be here. He was my fire plan." And Rob Gordon writes of a woman saying, "I wanted a man who'd protect me or die in the attempt." A worrying 2013 statistic is that intentions to stay and defend remain unchanged for men despite Black Saturday, while women's intentions dropped 20%. These statistics relate directly to society's expectations. Women judged on how well they cared for their family, and men on how well their behaviour matched expectations of protecting, providing and heroic masculinity. The effect is that gender roles are further cemented in disasters, along with the gendered expectations we know are harmful to both women and men. If leave and live is to gain traction, this must be addressed. The new GEM guidelines recommend actions to do this. In conclusion, here's part of a poem by a Black Saturday survivor addressing her husband. The way you tell it, we had an infallible plan, your foresight arming us against catastrophe. The way you tell it, your quick thinking saved the day, you rescued us. Unashamedly, you reinvent the narrative landscape, cast yourself in the starring role, paint me with passivity, render me invisible. Sadly, our media, emergency management sector and society generally also depict women as passive and invisible, a false premise for fire planning. This final slide is a bit of a summary. It's actually just saying that there's I can't really see with my glasses. Here we go, sorry. So this is a bit of a summary to simplify it. So at the top, there's actions aligning with gendered expectations, leading to them being reported in an exaggerated way to reinforce stereotypical gender roles, leading to selective awarding of male actions, then on to, again, reinforcement of gendered roles where men are heroes, women are passive and invisible, leading to pressure to stay and to demonstrate masculinity. Then again, it starts again. This cycle sits in opposition to the government evidence-based policy of leave and live.